The crystal champagne flute felt cold in Caroline's hand, a stark contrast to the burning shame creeping up her neck. Her husband, Jonathan, let out a booming laugh that echoed slightly in the grand ballroom. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but one of pure, cutting mockery. Standing beside him, sleek and predatory in a crimson dress, his colleague Giselle smirked. "Honestly, darling," Jonathan slurred, gesturing towards Caroline's swollen belly. "Look at the state of it. We can't take you anywhere. My poor, frumpy little incubator." The words, spoken just loud enough for their small circle to hear, were daggers. And he delivered them in front of the one person he was trying to impress the most, unaware that his entire world was about to be shattered by the very woman he was so publicly humiliating. The apartment was a testament to Jonathan Vance's success, a minimalist masterpiece of glass and steel overlooking the sprawling metropolis of New York City. Every piece of furniture was a carefully chosen statement, every surface polished to a mirror shine. It was a space designed for ambition, for closing deals, for celebrating victories. It was not, Caroline Hayes often felt, a place designed for living, especially not for the messy, unpredictable, and overwhelmingly beautiful business of creating a new life. At 7 months pregnant, Caroline felt like an intruder in her own home. Her body, once lean and energetic, now felt cumbersome, a foreign country she was still learning to navigate. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her hands often resting on the gentle curve of her stomach, a gesture of both protection and reassurance. Jonathan called it waddling. He'd say it with a smirk, a casual cruelty that had become the background noise of their marriage. "For God's sake, Caroline, can you try to keep up?" He'd snap as they walked down the street, his long strides eating up the pavement while she struggled to match his pace. "We're going to be late." Late for what? Another dinner with his smarmy colleagues who looked right through her. Another gallery opening where he'd network tirelessly while she stood by a potted plant, feeling as decorative and ignored as the foliage. Their life had become a performance, and she had been relegated to a non-speaking role. He was the star, the brilliant senior vice president at Nexus Capital Partners, the man tipped for the next big promotion, a full partnership. She was his wife, the appendage, the future mother of his heir, a role he seemed to view with a mixture of pride and profound irritation. The silence between them was the heaviest thing in the apartment. It was thicker than the plush Tibetan rugs, more imposing than the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a silence born of 1,000 unspoken resentments, a million moments of casual disregard. He no longer asked about her day, assuming it was a monotonous cycle of prenatal appointments and nursery decorating. He had stopped seeing her, the woman he had once pursued with a relentless, all-consuming passion. The woman with a mind as sharp as his own, a wit that could cut through his arrogance, a past he had conveniently forgotten. Now all he saw was the belly. He saw stretch marks and swollen ankles. He saw a liability, an anchor holding him back from the sleek, untethered life he craved. The invitation had arrived a week prior, an embossed card thick with importance. Nexus Capital Partners was hosting its annual Zenith Gala, a lavish affair where the city's financial titans gathered. This year was special. The firm's founder and CEO, the formidable Desmond Blackwood, was set to announce a new partner. The entire office was buzzing with speculation. The consensus was that the promotion would come from within. The frontrunner was a man named Gregory Finch, a ruthless operator with a portfolio as impressive as his ego. But Jonathan was a close second. He had spent the last year killing himself for the firm, landing a landmark acquisition that had put Nexus on the map. He believed the partnership was his destiny. "You have to come," he had told Caroline. not asked. He'd tossed the invitation onto the marble kitchen island. Blackwood expects spouses to be there. It's about presenting the right image. A stable family man. He'd looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her maternity dress. A faint frown creased his brow. Try to find something elegant, not one of those tent things you've been wearing. The words were a small, precise incision, expertly placed. Caroline had simply nodded, her hand instinctively going to her belly. The baby kicked, a small internal flutter that was hers alone. We're okay, she thought, a silent mantra. We will be okay. She remembered a time when Jonathan's ambition had been a shared flame, something that warmed them both. They had met in business school, two bright minds clashing in lecture halls and study groups. He was drawn to her quiet brilliance, her ability to deconstruct a complex financial model with an almost artistic elegance. She was drawn to his drive, his charisma, his unwavering belief that he could conquer the world. They were going to be a power couple, a force to be reckoned with. But somewhere along the way, his ambition had mutated. It had become a hungry, selfish thing, demanding to be the only ambition in the room. Her own career, a promising start in forensic accounting, was gently but firmly pushed aside. It's too demanding, honey, he'd said. With the hours I'm pulling, we need one of us to have a more stable foundation for our future. She had agreed, believing it was a temporary sacrifice for a shared dream. She took on freelance consulting work from home, small projects that kept her mind sharp, but were easily dismissed by Jonathan as hobbies. He never asked about the details of her work, the intricate webs of financial deceit she unraveled for her anonymous clients. He didn't know that under the pseudonym CH Analytics, she had become one of the most sought-after independent auditors in the country, a ghost in the machine who could find the skeletons in any corporation's closet. Her work was her secret, a hidden part of herself that she nurtured in the quiet hours after he went to sleep or before he woke up. It was the only place she still felt like herself. The night of the gala arrived on a wave of cold autumn air. Caroline had spent hours getting ready, not to please Jonathan, but for herself. She had found a stunning, deep sapphire gown, custom-tailored to flow gracefully over her bump. It didn't hide her pregnancy, it celebrated it. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and her makeup was subtle but flawless. For the first time in months, when she looked in the mirror, she saw a flicker of the woman she used to be, confident, poised, and powerful. Jonathan barely glanced at her when he emerged from his dressing room, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. Ready? The car's downstairs. Try not to trip. The ride to the venue was silent. He was engrossed in his phone, scrolling through market reports, his thumb moving with a frantic energy. Caroline watched the city lights blur past, a river of gold and silver. She felt a strange sense of calm settle over her, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. She knew tonight was important for him. What he didn't know was that tonight was important for her too, but for entirely different reasons. He was walking into a celebration of his own making. She was walking into a reckoning, and as she placed a hand on the life moving inside her, she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was not walking into it alone. The offices of Nexus Capital Partners were a cathedral of modern capitalism. Sunlight streamed through 40-foot windows, illuminating minimalist desks and the quiet hum of immense wealth being generated. It was a place of sharp suits, sharper minds, and the unspoken, brutal hierarchy of the financial world. Jonathan Vance moved through it like a prince in his own kingdom. His confidence was an aura, his stride purposeful, his greetings to subordinates a perfect blend of charm and condescension. His kingdom, however, had a serpent. Her name was Giselle Croft. Giselle was everything Caroline was not. She was sharp angles and straight lines, from her severe black bob to her stiletto heels that clicked on the marble floors like tiny aggressive hammers. She was an associate in the Mergers and Acquisitions division, working directly under Jonathan. She was ambitious, intelligent, and utterly without scruple. And for the past 6 months, she had been Jonathan's mistress. Their affair was a poorly kept secret, a sizzling undercurrent in the sterile office environment. They conducted it with a brazen carelessness, born of Jonathan's arrogance and Giselle's belief that she was on the winning team. They'd have long lunches that left them flushed and disheveled, late-night strategy sessions behind his closed office door, and shared glances across the boardroom table that were thick with complicity. "Did you see the latest numbers on the Sterling merger?" Jonathan asked, leaning over her desk, his voice low. His hand brushed hers as he pointed to a figure on her screen, a touch that lingered a fraction of a second too long. "I ran the projections this morning," Giselle replied, turning to look up at him. Her eyes were a cool, calculating grey. "We're going to blow Q4 out of the water. Finch's division can't touch us." She smiled, a small, triumphant curve of her lips. "The partnership is yours, Jonathan. It's a lock." "From your lips to Blackwood's ears," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her mouth. He felt a familiar thrill, the intoxicating mix of power and desire. Giselle made him feel seen, admired. She mirrored his ambition, his ruthlessness. She didn't complain about his long hours. She encouraged them. She didn't talk about nursery colours or swollen ankles. She talked about hostile takeovers and market domination. She was the future, sleek and exciting. Caroline, in his mind, had become the past. "Speaking of which," Giselle said, her tone shifting to one of mock sympathy, "is your wife coming to the gala tonight?" She said the word wife as if it were a quaint, slightly embarrassing anachronism. Jonathan sighed dramatically, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Of course, the Blackwood mandate. Happy wife, happy life, stable partner, all that archaic nonsense. "How is she?" Giselle asked, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Must be so uncomfortable. All that bloating." He chuckled, a low, conspiratorial sound. "You have no idea. It's like living with a planet. And the moods, my God. One minute she's crying over a commercial for cat food. The next, she's just staring into space. I swear the pregnancy has sucked out whatever personality she had left." It was a casual, brutal betrayal, whispered in the hallowed halls of his professional life. He was sacrificing his wife's dignity on the altar of his ego, and Giselle was his eager high priestess. "Poor you," she purred, placing a manicured hand on his forearm. "Having to deal with all that domestic drama when you're on the verge of the biggest triumph of your career. It's not fair." "Tell me about it," he grumbled. "I just need to get through tonight. Smile, make sure she doesn't spill anything on herself, and wait for Blackwood to call my name. Once I'm a partner, everything changes. I'll have the capital, the influence, the freedom to make some real decisions." The unspoken meaning hung between them. The freedom to leave his pregnant wife and start a new, more glamorous life with Giselle. It was the promise he had dangled, the future she was banking on. She saw herself as Mrs. Vance, but a different kind, the power couple version he had once dreamed of with Caroline. Giselle was certain she could be a better leading lady. Throughout the day, the office buzzed with gala-related tension. Everyone was speculating about the new partner. While Jonathan was a strong contender, the whispers of an outside hire had begun to circulate. Heard Blackwood's been courting someone, a junior analyst mentioned by the coffee machine. Some ghost consultant. No one knows their real name, just the company. Hayes Analytics. Apparently they're a legend in corporate restructuring. A real shark. Jonathan overheard this and scoffed. Nonsense, he said to Gregory Finch, his main rival, who was pouring a coffee nearby. Blackwood is old school. He promotes from within. He rewards loyalty. That's just gossip to keep us on our toes. Finch, a portly man with shrewd eyes, shrugged. Don't be so sure, Vance. Blackwood didn't get where he is by being predictable. If there's a bigger shark out there, he'll find a way to get them in our tank. The comment pricked at Jonathan's confidence, but he quickly swatted it away. An outsider? A consultant? No. It had to be him. He had sacrificed too much, worked too hard. His entire identity was wrapped up in this promotion. It was the validation he needed, the proof that all his choices, including the slow, painful dissolution of his marriage, had been worth it. Later that afternoon, he found Giselle by the elevators. "Nervous?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Never," he lied, just eager to get it over with. "I picked out a dress that will make everyone forget who the other partners are," she said, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "Crimson. A power color." "I can't wait to see it," he said, his hand finding the small of her back as they stepped into the crowded elevator. It was a brazen act, and he saw the flicker of surprise and disapproval on the faces of his colleagues. He didn't care. He felt invincible. Tonight he would be crowned king, and Giselle would be his queen. As he stood in his office, looking out at the city he was determined to conquer, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Caroline. "I'm starting to get ready. Just wanted to say I hope you have a wonderful evening. You've worked so hard for this." He read the message and felt a pang of something. Not guilt, more like annoyance. It was her attempt at a truce, a moment of support. But to him, it felt pathetic. It was the plea of the vanquished. He didn't reply. He put the phone back in his pocket, the message unread, and straightened his tie. He had more important things to focus on. He had a coronation to attend. He smoothed his suit jacket, practiced his winning smile in the reflection of the glass, and went to find Giselle. The serpent was waiting, and he was more than ready for her kiss. The ballroom of the Astor Hotel was a symphony of excess. Towering floral arrangements perfumed the air, their scent mingling with expensive cologne and the subtle electric hum of ambition. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a fractured golden light over the assembled crowd. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos and women in shimmering gowns moved through the room like schools of exotic fish, their laughter light and brittle. This was Jonathan's world, and tonight he was its gravitational center. He stood near the main bar, a glass of vintage scotch in his hand, with Giselle at his side. She was a vision in crimson, the dress clinging to her body like a second skin. She was an accessory that screamed success, a living, breathing trophy. Jonathan felt a surge of pride. This was how it was supposed to be. Power, beauty, and the promise of more. He had barely acknowledged Caroline's arrival. She had entered the ballroom quietly, a solitary figure of sapphire blue in a sea of black, gold, and red. She moved with a serene confidence that irritated him. She wasn't clinging to the walls or looking lost, as he had expected. Instead, she found a small table near the edge of the room, accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter, and simply watched. Her calm was a quiet rebuke to his frantic energy. "There she is," Giselle murmured, nodding in Caroline's direction, Her lip curled almost imperceptibly. "That dress is certainly a choice. Very maternal." The word was meant as an insult, a way of marking Caroline as other, as belonging to a different, less important world. Jonathan laughed, the sound a little too loud, a little too harsh. "I told her to find something elegant. I suppose that's the best she could do. It's hard to wrap a package that big." A few of their colleagues standing nearby chuckled nervously. They glanced from Jonathan's sneering face to the elegant, pregnant woman sitting alone across the room. It was a moment of supreme cruelty performed for an audience. Jonathan, buoyed by the scotch and his own ego, decided to press his advantage. He wanted to solidify the narrative in everyone's mind. He was the dynamic, rising star, and she was the dowdy, domestic baggage he was forced to carry. He and Giselle began to walk, a slow, deliberate circuit of the room, stopping to chat with other executives. He made sure their path would eventually lead them directly past Caroline's table. Caroline saw them coming. She watched Jonathan glide through the room, Giselle attached to his arm like a designer parasite. She saw the way he touched her, the way he leaned in to whisper in her ear. There was no attempt to hide it. It was a declaration. She felt a familiar ache in her chest, but beneath it, something else was hardening. Not anger, but resolve. A cold, clear certainty. They stopped in front of her table. Jonathan leaned down, placing his hands on the back of an empty chair, his posture one of casual dominance. "Having fun, darling?" he asked, his voice laced with a condescending sweetness that made her skin crawl. "I'm enjoying the view," Caroline said, her voice even. Her eyes met his, and for a second he felt a flicker of something he didn't recognize. It wasn't sadness or anger. It looked almost like pity. Giselle let out a little, tinkling laugh. "We were just saying how brave you are to come out. It must be so exhausting, I can't imagine." She looked pointedly at Caroline's belly. "I'm so focused on my career, I just couldn't fathom putting my body through all that. My work is my baby." It was a direct hit, a calculated insult designed to diminish Caroline's entire existence into a biological function. Caroline's gaze shifted to Giselle. Her expression remained placid, but her eyes were suddenly sharp, analytical. It was the look she got when she was staring at a fraudulent balance sheet, the moment just before she found the lie. "That's one way to look at it," Caroline said softly. "Another is that building a legacy takes many forms. Some people build them with spreadsheets and leveraged buyouts. Others build them with flesh and blood. Both require a great deal of strength and integrity." The word integrity hung in the air, a quiet accusation. Giselle's smile tightened. She hadn't expected a response, let alone one with such a sharp edge. Jonathan, feeling the tide of the conversation turn, decided to end it with a final, crushing blow. He wanted to reassert his dominance, to put Caroline back in the box he had built for her. He let out the booming, performative laugh that Caroline had heard from across the room. "Oh, darling, listen to you," he said, shaking his head as if she were a precocious child. He gestured vaguely at her midsection. "Legacy? Please, don't be so dramatic. You're my poor, frumpy little incubator. Just focus on that, okay? Let the grown-ups handle the important work." The words hit the air and seemed to suck all the oxygen out of it. The nervous chuckles from their colleagues died. A few people looked away, their discomfort palpable. It was no longer a joke. It was a public execution of his wife's dignity. Giselle smirked, her victory complete. Caroline didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply looked at her husband, the man she had once loved, the father of her unborn child, and saw him for what he truly was, a hollow man, terrified and small, puffing himself up with the pain of others. The burning shame she had felt earlier was gone, replaced by an icy calm. She slowly pushed her chair back and rose to her feet. The sapphire dress fell in perfect lines, and suddenly she didn't look cumbersome or frumpy. She looked regal. She looked powerful. Her height, enhanced by the pregnancy, made her seem taller than him for a moment. "You're right, Jonathan," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the sudden lull. "The grown-ups do have important work to handle." She turned, without another glance at him or his mistress, and began to walk. Not back to the lonely table at the edge of the room, but towards the stage at the front, where Desmond Blackwood was now stepping up to the podium, a sheaf of papers in his hand. Jonathan watched her go, a frown of confusion on his face. What was she doing? Was she leaving? Creating a scene? He felt a flash of fury. How dare she try to steal his moment? "What the hell is her problem?" he muttered to Giselle. Giselle just shrugged, her eyes fixed on the stage. "Let her go. It's for the best. Now, quiet. Blackwood's about to speak. He's about to announce your new life." Jonathan turned his attention to the stage, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. He straightened his tuxedo, ready to hear his name. The reckoning was here, and he was sure he was the one holding the gavel. He had never been more wrong in his life. The low murmur of the ballroom faded to a respectful hush as Desmond Blackwood tapped the microphone. Blackwood was a man who seemed to have been carved from granite and ambition. His silver hair was immaculate, his eyes were a piercing blue that missed nothing, and he commanded the room not with volume, but with presence. "Good evening," he began, his voice a low baritone that resonated through the hall. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate another record-breaking year for Nexus Capital. Success is not an accident. It is the result of vision, of relentless drive, and most importantly, of having the right people at the helm." Jonathan stood taller, his heart pounding a triumphant rhythm against his ribs. This was it, the preamble to his ascension. He caught Giselle's eye, and she gave him a subtle, encouraging nod. His entire being was focused on that stage, waiting for the words that would change his life. "For months now," Blackwood continued, "the board and I have been engaged in a search not just for a new partner, but for a new kind of partner. In today's volatile market, we need more than just a brilliant deal-maker. We need a strategist, a visionary, someone who can see not just the next move, but the entire board, 3 games ahead. Someone who can diagnose a problem before anyone else even knows the company is sick." Jonathan's smile was fixed, unwavering. "He's talking about me," he thought. "The Sterling acquisition. I saw the weakness in their structure before anyone. We looked internally, and we have an incredible stable of talent right here in this room," Blackwood said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Jonathan felt the weight of that gaze as it passed over him. "But to truly future-proof this firm, I knew we had to look further. We needed a legend. We needed a ghost." A ripple of confusion went through the room. Jonathan's smile faltered. "A ghost? What is he talking about?" He remembered the whispers about an outside consultant. No, it couldn't be. "There is a name, whispered with a certain reverence, in the circles of corporate recovery and forensic auditing," Blackwood explained. "A firm that has been the secret weapon behind some of the biggest corporate turnarounds of the last decade. A firm so discreet, so effective, that its principal has remained anonymous. A phantom in the world of high finance. I'm talking, of course, about Hayes Analytics." The name hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Hayes, Caroline's maiden name. His blood ran cold, his mind reeled, trying to connect two impossibly disparate ideas. Caroline? His quiet, unassuming wife who organized his sock drawer and managed their social calendar? The creator of a legendary auditing firm? It was ludicrous. A coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. He looked around wildly, trying to find her, but she was lost in the crowd near the stage. For 6 months, I have been in negotiations to bring the architect of this firm into our fold, Blackwood announced, his voice rising with theatrical flair. Not just to work with us, but to lead a new, expanded division of strategic risk and recovery. We didn't just want their services, we wanted their mind. We wanted the founder. And tonight, I am profoundly proud and unbelievably excited to announce that we have succeeded. We have acquired Hayes Analytics, and with it, we have found our new partner. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. Jonathan felt like he was suffocating. His throat was dry, his palms slick with sweat. He was no longer thinking about his promotion. He was trapped in a vortex of surreal dread. Blackwood paused, letting the suspense build to a crescendo. It is my great honor to introduce to you the brilliant mind behind it all, a person whose integrity is as formidable as their intellect. Please join me in welcoming the newest partner of Nexus Capital Partners, Ms. Caroline Hayes. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The name registered, but it didn't compute. The crowd looked around, confused. Jonathan Vance's pregnant wife? The woman he had just publicly ridiculed? Then, from the side of the stage, Caroline stepped into the spotlight. The transformation was absolute. She was no longer the quiet spouse in the corner. Bathed in the warm glow of the stage lights, she was luminous. The sapphire dress seemed to shimmer with authority. Her expression was calm, composed, and utterly commanding. She walked to the center of the stage and shook Desmond Blackwood's outstretched hand. The ballroom erupted. Not with applause at first, but with a collective gasp, a wave of shock and disbelief that rolled through the room. Whispers turned into frantic murmurs. People were turning to stare at Jonathan, their faces a mixture of pity, confusion, and dawning, delicious schadenfreude. Jonathan felt the floor drop out from beneath him. The Scotch glass slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the floor, but he didn't hear it. The only sound was a deafening roar in his ears. His eyes were locked on the woman on the stage, his wife, Caroline. She stepped up to the microphone that Blackwood had ceded to her. "Thank you, Desmond," she said, her voice smooth and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. It was the same voice she used to ask him if he wanted coffee, but now it held an authority he had never heard before. "For many years, I've preferred to work behind the scenes," she began, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. "I believe that good work speaks for itself. But Mr. Blackwood made me an offer that was about more than just business. It was about building something new, something better, a firm that values not just profit, but foresight, not just aggression, but integrity." Her eyes found Jonathan in the crowd. He stood frozen, a statue of disbelief, with Giselle beside him, her face a mask of pale, slack-jawed horror. Caroline's gaze lingered on him for just a beat, no malice in it, only a profound, heartbreaking finality. It was the look of a chapter closing. "I am thrilled to join Nexus Capital," she concluded, "and I look forward to working with all of you to build that future together." The room, finally recovering from its collective shock, burst into thunderous applause. It was a wave of sound, of admiration, of respect. They were applauding the ghost, the legend, the brilliant mind of Hayes Analytics. They were applauding Caroline. Jonathan didn't hear them. He was trapped in the wreckage of his own reality. The woman he had called a frumpy incubator was his new boss. The wife he had dismissed and belittled held his entire career in the palm of her hand. The future he had been so certain of had just been utterly and irrevocably annihilated. And the architect of his destruction was the one person he had never, not for a single second, seen coming. The applause for Carolyn was a tidal wave that swept Jonathan out to sea. He stood stranded in a suddenly hostile ocean, the faces around him shifting from collegial to curious, from respectful to contemptuous. The whispers were no longer about the new partner. They were about him. "Did you hear what he called her? Right in front of everyone." The look on his face is priceless. Every word was a grain of salt in his gaping wound. Giselle was the first to abandon the sinking ship. Her face, which moments ago had been alight with shared ambition, was now a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. She took a half step away from him, a small but significant act of disassociation. "Jonathan, she started, but the words failed her. What could she say? She looked from his ashen face to the powerful woman on stage being mobbed by well-wishers, and the cold, hard calculus of her ambition gave her the answer. Jonathan was no longer an asset. He was a liability, a spectacular, career-ending liability. "I need some air," she muttered, and without another look, she turned and melted into the crowd, leaving him utterly alone. He barely noticed her departure. His world had narrowed to a single point of focus. Caroline. She was descending the stage, moving with the same serene grace she'd had all evening, but now people were parting for her, making way. Partners he had spent years trying to impress were now shaking her hand with deference, their smiles genuine and admiring. He had to talk to her. He had to understand. Pushing through the crowd with a clumsy urgency, he finally reached her as she was speaking with Desmond Blackwood. "Carolyn," he said, his voice a ragged croak. She turned to face him. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but it was overshadowed by a deep, unshakable strength. She was no longer just his wife. She was a stranger, a formidable executive he didn't know at all. "Jonathan," she acknowledged, her tone polite but distant, the tone a senior partner might use with a problematic subordinate. Mr. Blackwood looked from Carolyn to Jonathan, his expression one of pure, uncut disappointment. "Vance," he said, his voice like gravel. "You have my commiserations. It must be quite a shock." There was no sympathy in his words, only judgment. He then turned back to Caroline. "If you'll excuse me, Caroline, I need to speak with the board. We'll connect on Monday to begin the integration." He gave Jonathan one last, withering look and walked away. They were alone, sealed in a bubble of suffocating silence amidst the noise of the party. "How?" Jonathan whispered, the question a desperate plea. "When? Why didn't you tell me?" Caroline looked at him, and for the first time she let a flicker of her long-suppressed weariness show. "Tell you what, Jonathan, that I had a mind of my own, that I didn't simply cease to exist when you walked out the door each morning? When would have been a good time to bring it up? Between your complaints about my moods or your jokes about my waddling? That's not, I didn't mean," he stammered, his usual glib confidence completely gone. "What didn't you mean?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Did you not mean to laugh at me in front of your mistress tonight? Did you not mean to call me a frumpy little incubator? Which part of your public humiliation of the mother of your child was a misunderstanding?" Each question was a precise, painful jab. He had no defense. "I built my company in the quiet spaces you left for me," she continued, her voice gaining strength. I built it late at night after you'd gone to bed, annoyed that I was still tapping away on my laptop. I built it in the early mornings before you were awake. I built it while you were on your long business trips with Giselle. I built it because I had to. It was the only part of my life that you hadn't touched, hadn't criticized, hadn't tried to shrink. It was the only place I was still me. The pieces began to click into place in his shattered mind. Her hobby. The late nights he'd resented. The locked files on her computer he'd dismissed as recipes or baby name lists. It had all been happening right under his nose, a parallel universe of brilliance and success he had been too arrogant to see. "Why hide it?" he asked, his voice breaking. "We were supposed to be a team." A sad, humorless smile touched her lips. "Were we? A team requires mutual respect, Jonathan. When was the last time you asked me a single question about my thoughts, my ideas, my ambitions, and actually listened to the answer? You didn't want a partner. You wanted a cheerleader, an assistant, a beautifully decorated vessel for your heir. When I got pregnant, even that wasn't good enough. I became an inconvenience, an embarrassment." She took a step closer, and he instinctively flinched. "I kept it a secret because I knew you wouldn't understand it," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "And worse, you would have tried to take credit for it. You would have absorbed it into your own narrative, my success becoming just another feather in your cap. This," she gestured around the opulent ballroom at the world that was now hers, "this I had to do for myself, and for our child." Her hand went to her belly. "I'm giving our daughter a mother who is not just a footnote in her father's story. I am giving her a mother who is the author of her own, a mother who can build an empire and a family at the same time, a mother who knows her own worth, even when the man who promised to love her does everything in his power to make her forget it." The finality in her voice was absolute. This wasn't a fight. It was a verdict. She had judged him, found him wanting, and was now moving on. "So what now?" he asked, the question pathetic and small. "What does this mean for us? For me at the firm?" Caroline looked at him, her expression shifting from weariness to the cool, detached assessment of a CEO. "Us ended a long time ago, Jonathan. You just didn't notice. I'll have my lawyer contact yours about the apartment and the divorce proceedings. As for the firm," she paused, letting the weight of her next word settle. "You'll report to Gregory Finch, effective Monday. My new division will be taking precedence on all major accounts. I expect your full cooperation. You are, after all, just a senior vice president. You work for me now." She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at him one last time. "And Jonathan," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion, "don't ever speak about my body again." With that, she walked away, leaving him standing in the ruins of the life he had so carelessly demolished. The laughter, the whispers, the shattered glass at his feet. It was all a monument to his own spectacular, self-inflicted downfall. Monday morning at Nexus Capital, partners felt like the day after a revolution. The air, usually charged with the aggressive energy of a trading floor, was thick with a tense, watchful silence. The news of the gala had spread like wildfire, mutating with each telling until it had become the stuff of corporate legend. Jonathan Vance, the arrogant prince, had been publicly dethroned by his own quiet, pregnant queen. When Jonathan walked through the glass doors, it was as if a ghost had entered the building. Conversations ceased. Heads turned. The looks he received were a brutal cocktail of pity, morbid curiosity, and thinly veiled contempt. He, who had thrived on being the center of attention, now found it to be an unbearable torture. His aura of invincibility was gone, replaced by the stench of failure. His office, once his sanctuary of power, felt like a glass cage. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him, watching his every move. His first meeting was with Gregory Finch, his longtime rival, now his direct superior. Finch, who had always been a step behind Jonathan, was now relishing his victory. "Vance," Finch said, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. He didn't bother to ask Jonathan to sit. "Tough weekend?" Jonathan just stared at him, his jaw tight. "Look, the board and Ms. Hayes want to make this transition as smooth as possible," Finch continued, savoring every word. "Your accounts are being reassigned to her new strategic risk division. You'll be handling the overflow, mostly legacy clients, paperwork, maintenance, that sort of thing." It was a demotion in all but name. He was being sidelined, put out to pasture. The high-stakes, high-glory deals were gone. He was being relegated to the corporate basement. "And Jonathan," Finch added, his eyes gleaming with malice, "a word of advice. Keep your head down. You're on very thin ice." The humiliation was just beginning. Later that day, an email went out announcing the formal integration of Hayes Analytics. It included a new organizational chart. There, at the very top, just under Desmond Blackwood, was Caroline Hayes, partner and head of strategic risk. And there, buried deep in a sub-department under Gregory Finch, was his own name, Jonathan Vance, SVP, Legacy Accounts. His affair with Giselle evaporated as if it had never existed. He saw her near the coffee machine, and she met his gaze for a fleeting second before turning her back on him, engaging in an animated conversation with another colleague. Her message was clear. He was poison. Their shared whispers and secret trysts were now a liability she couldn't afford. She had gambled on a king and lost. Now she was scrambling to distance herself from the court jester. His life outside the office was imploding with equal ferocity. When he returned to the apartment that evening, a neatly packed suitcase was waiting for him by the door. On top was a single-page letter from Caroline's lawyer. It was a formal notice to vacate the premises, which were solely in her name. A detail he'd forgotten, a prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on to protect his assets, never imagining her assets would one day dwarf his own. The locks had already been changed. He checked into a sterile, soulless corporate hotel. The silence was deafening. He tried to call Caroline, but the calls went straight to voicemail. He sent a flurry of texts, a pathetic mix of apology, blame and desperation. "Caroline, we need to talk. This is insane. I'm sorry, okay? I was an idiot, a jerk. I'm sorry. How could you do this to me? To us? After everything? I love you. Don't do this." The final text felt like a lie, even as he typed it. Had he ever truly loved her? Or had he just loved the idea of her, the way she fit into the life he was building? He received only one reply, not from her, but from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Vance, this is Caroline Hayes's personal assistant. Please direct all future correspondence to her legal counsel. She will not be responding to you directly." He was shut out, completely and efficiently. The same ruthless precision she applied to her work was now being applied to the dismantling of their life together. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. At work, he was a pariah. His projects were mundane. His authority was non-existent, and he was forced to sit in meetings where Caroline's name was spoken with a reverence once reserved for Blackwood himself. He would see her in the hallways, always surrounded by people, always deep in conversation. She never looked at him. It was as if he had been erased from her world. He tried to salvage his pride, to find some way to reclaim his narrative. He cornered a junior analyst he had once mentored. "It's a crazy situation, right?" he said, attempting a laugh. "My wife, of all people." The young man just looked at him with uncomfortable pity. "She's really impressive, sir. The models she built for the new risk assessments are revolutionary." He quickly made an excuse and fled. Jonathan was no longer a success story. He was a cautionary tale. He was the man who had gold in his house and went digging in the dirt. He was the fool who laughed at a giant, unaware he was standing in her shadow. His house of cards, built on a foundation of arrogance and deceit, had been blown down by a single, quiet breath of truth. And now he was left shivering in the ruins, utterly and deservedly alone. 3 months passed. Winter had settled over the city, encasing the skyscrapers in a brittle layer of frost. Inside the gleaming tower of Nexus Capital, however, a new season was in full bloom. It was the season of Caroline Hayes. She had transformed the firm. Her new division wasn't just a success, it was a juggernaut. She moved with an unhurried, decisive energy, her pregnancy not a hindrance but a symbol of her power. She could create life and restructure a multi-billion-dollar portfolio with the same focused, formidable grace. She was respected, admired, and slightly feared. No one dared to call her frumpy now. They called her Ms. Hayes. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl in early January. She named her Victoria, a name that meant victory. Caroline took only 2 weeks of maternity leave, setting up a state-of-the-art nursery and nanny's quarters in a spare office next to her own. She was a mother and a partner, and she refused to believe the two were mutually exclusive. She would be there for board meetings and for first steps. She was building her empire and her legacy side by side. Jonathan, meanwhile, had faded into the background. He was a ghost in his old kingdom. The demotion was permanent. He did his tedious work with a joyless, mechanical efficiency. He had sold his sports car, moved into a small, unremarkable apartment, and his expensive suits now seemed to hang off his frame. The fire in him was gone, replaced by a permanent, simmering ash of resentment and regret. He had seen his daughter only once. Carolyn had allowed a supervised 1-hour visit, arranged through their lawyers. He had held the tiny, perfect child in his arms, and for the first time, he felt the crushing weight of what he had truly lost. It wasn't just the status, the money, or the power. It was this fragile, beautiful future he had thrown away with a careless laugh. Victoria had her mother's calm, watchful eyes. Looking at her was like looking at his own failure. The final divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. The terms were brutally simple. He would get none of her assets from Hayes Analytics, as per the prenup he had championed. He was given a modest, one-time settlement from their shared marital property. He had visitation rights, but Caroline had sole legal and physical custody. It was a swift, clean amputation. One afternoon, he was leaving the office late when the elevator doors opened, and he found himself standing face to face with her. She was holding a baby carrier, Victoria sleeping peacefully inside. It was the first time they had been truly alone in months. She looked radiant. Motherhood suited her. There was a softness to her features that hadn't been there before, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Jonathan," she said, her voice neutral. "Caroline," he replied, his gaze fixed on the sleeping child. She looks beautiful." "She is," Caroline said simply. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with the ghosts of everything they had once been and everything they would never be. He had to say it. He had to try, one last time, not to win her back, but to understand. "I want you to know," he started, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "I truly am sorry. For everything. I was a fool, blind and arrogant and cruel. There's no excuse. I see that now." Caroline listened, her expression unreadable. She adjusted the blanket over Victoria. "Apology accepted, Jonathan," she said, and the words, though what he wanted to hear, offered no comfort. There was no warmth, no absolution. It was a transaction, a closing of an account. But forgiveness is not the same as a second chance. You didn't just break my trust. You revealed your character. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure our daughter is surrounded by people of better character than that. The elevator arrived at the ground floor. The doors opened to the bustling lobby. "I wish you well," she said, and it was clear she meant it. She held no malice for him anymore. Malice required energy, and he was no longer worth her energy. He was simply a part of her past, a lesson learned. He watched her walk away, a powerful woman with her child, stepping out into the city lights to a life she had built for herself, not from his ashes, but from her own fire. He had been a chapter in her story, but she was the entire book, and he finally understood that the greatest partnership he had ever been offered was the one he had been too blind to see, and he would spend the rest of his life living in the quiet, empty space where that love used to be. Jonathan Vance learned the hardest lesson of all. A person's true worth is not in the image they project, but in the strength they hold in silence. He dismissed his wife as a simple incubator, only to discover she was the architect of an empire he could only dream of building. Caroline's story is a powerful reminder that the people we underestimate are often the ones with the most profound power, waiting for the right moment to reveal their brilliance. She didn't seek revenge. She simply claimed the success that was rightfully hers, building a new life of victory and integrity for herself and her daughter. If Caroline's journey from being silenced to becoming the most powerful voice in the room resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more unforgettable stories where the underestimated rise and claim the power they were always meant to have. What did you think of Jonathan's downfall? Let us know in the comments below.